the tail end of 2009, rumors began swirling around the internet that American movie company Legendary Pictures, famous for making movies like The Dark Knight, Watchmen, 300, amongst many others, had acquired the rights from Toho to produce a brand new American reboot of Godzilla. A rumor that was started by websites like BloodyDisgusting.com, Ain't It Cool News, and YouTube channels like Deviant Sun 13, who all speculated about the news, what it could mean, and what exactly was going to go on with the franchise. It didn't take long for these rumors to be confirmed, however, in March of 2010, when not only Legendary but also Toho came out and said that these rumors were indeed true, and that they were going into production on an American Godzilla movie set to be released in the summer of 2012. To commemorate this event, in May of 2010, yours truly sat down and did his very first video about this subject, in which I analyzed what we found out to be later fake picture, supposedly from the movie, representing a Godzilla bust that was going to be the stepping stone for how Godzilla was going to look in the movie, and also a video where I re-envisioned the word with as an adjective. Yeah, I've come a long way. Roughly a year later, we got our first really, truly enormous piece of news that was truly going to shape how the production of the film was going to move on from there. Something that fans had been speculating about for a long time, and that's who was going to direct the movie. With Legendary going in a strange direction, announcing that indie filmmaker Gareth Edwards, who had really only done one major motion picture before that with his independent film Monsters, was going to helm their reboot of The Big G, which everybody was kind of skeptical about because the guy had only done one movie before that. It was very low budget, with the special effects done by him, but it was an interesting kind of fresh take on a monster movie. So it was a smart move and an interesting decision on Legendary's part, but what it did promise, based on the experience of watching Monsters, was a far more grounded and realistic take on Godzilla, which was good. That's what fans were going for. However, what fans were not going for so much was that Legendary also announced, a little bit after this, that the movie was going to be pushed back a year or two to 2014. However, in the summer of 2012, when the movie was supposed to come out, they did decide to release some cool stuff. Mainly at that year's San Diego Comic-Con, where they did a whole panel about the movie, brought Gareth Edwards out, and they showed a concept teaser trailer for the film before shooting had even begun, but very, very famously did not release the trailer online, lighting the internet ablaze with mass speculation, written accounts describing the trailer, which featured Robert Oppenheimer voicing over some imagery of destroyed buildings, and one very, very, now semi-iconic, silhouetted picture of Godzilla roaring, and also lighting the internet ablaze with a whole bunch of controversy because nobody got to see the trailer except the folks who were there, so Godzilla fans were a little bit peeved. Although the trailer did leak online about a year later. In the intervening time, however, I decided to keep myself busy by sitting down and rewatching all the classic Godzilla movies and doing very, very long, perhaps overly so, analyses of them in a little series I did called Godzilla Palooza, a daily series of reviews in which I dug deep into this franchise that I had known since my childhood and learned more about it, noticed things about it, got about as close to it as I ever have in my life, making me even more psyched for the brand new reboot. However, at the end of the series, I attempted to kind of sum up the franchise in order to kind of give it some sense of closure, even though we all knew it wasn't really the end of the franchise, well, because we had one more movie coming out. But it was kind of fitting because it almost felt like I was summing up the history of Godzilla and then looking to the future, namely commenting that we as Godzilla fans were now looking to Legendary Pictures to reinvigorate this legacy that I had just summed up in 2014. Jump ahead roughly a year and change later, and we got our very first look at what Legendary Pictures was doing to pay tribute to that legacy with the very first teaser trailer that came out for Godzilla 2014, which was a mix of actual film footage and stuff taken from that concept teaser that I mentioned earlier, and which leaked a month or two before this teaser trailer came out. The teaser trailer was very, very short and didn't show us much in the way of monster footage, really just being a mood piece for how exactly they were approaching Godzilla. And mood was the big word with this one, giving us a very, very, very terrifying, ominous take on Godzilla that promised to take Godzilla back to its more horrific roots, rather than doing something more cheesy, which fans were ecstatic about. And this impression was further supported a few months later when the full main trailer was released, giving us a more detailed look at the disaster movie tone of the thing, hints of a government cover-up story, and Bryan Cranston saying that we were going to go back to the Stone Age. Both trailers showed us that this Godzilla was going to be very, very serious, downright apocalyptic in tone, and perhaps most importantly to fans, was also going to be very, very careful to leave Godzilla's origins in the 1950s and tied heavily to atomic testing in the 1950s. Which, of course, fans like myself were super ecstatic about, despite some ambiguity as to how exactly he was going to connect to atomic testing in 1954. At this point, the 0 hour was rapidly approaching, and a slow but consistent release of movie trailers kept increasing fans' excitement and interest from the general public, giving us an ever-expanding look at Godzilla's return, and seeming to be everything, including myself, that fans were craving from it. Godzilla looked epic, internet flame wars over feet aside, the story looked engrossing, and Ken Watanabe's comments regarding the power of nature in the trailers assured us that the legacy and poignancy of Godzilla would be respected. But trailers can be deceptive, and ultimately it would all have to come down to the movie itself to see if the Big G was truly back in all his awesome atomic glory, or if the US had just thrown another iguana in the microwave, slapped the name Godzilla on it, and hoped nobody would notice. Well, it was about time to find out, because nearly 5 years after those initial rumors began, and 4 years after the word "with" was re-envisioned as an adjective by yours truly, Legendary Pictures' Godzilla reboot hit theaters on May 16th, 2014. And caused a tsunami amongst the pop culture ether, shattering box office expectations by several $1,000,000, breaking the hearts of Bryan Cranston fans everywhere, and also being one of the most polarizing films of recent memory, dividing viewers and Godzilla fans alike on how successfully director Gareth Edwards had reawakened the Big G. Some people called it an epic rebirth that more than respected the legacy. Others called it a cinematic cock tease that put them to sleep. Well, the movie's been out for more than half a year now, and I think I've waited long enough to sit down and give my take on the matter at exactly how well Legendary Pictures did at resurrecting Godzilla. Well, ladies, gentlemen, children, and anybody else who wandered in, I think it's time we reopened that old, crusty, disheveled marble composition notebook and pick up where I left off 2 years ago. Because, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Godzilla Palooza.
Nature has an order, a power to restore balance. I believe he is that power. We call him Godzilla.
Greetings, agents of Monarch, I am Zazubaar, and indeed, welcome back to Godzilla Palooza, the G2014 Addendum. I know it's been a long time coming, I know I promised this video all the way back in September, but here's the whole thing. There was a lot riding on this video for me personally. Because this video has been a long time coming, having done my first video about this movie 4 years ago, in which I knew nothing about it, just spouting off my own bullshit on how I thought the movie should be handled. Well, now I'm sitting down with the Blu-ray, seeing it sitting on my DVD shelf right next to Godzilla Final Wars, and about to record my full-on analysis of it. There was a lot of build-up to doing this, and that's why I wanted to do that retrospective of the kind of history of this movie in order to build up to that moment, to kind of recapture how long and how much energy I'd personally devoted into thinking about this movie, thinking how I thought the movie should work, and thinking about how the movie might do with or without my own thoughts. So, it was a weird experience. I mean, almost my entire high school career was spent with this movie almost looming over us. It was coming, whether we wanted it or not, though I personally wanted it, and I spent so much time thinking about it. Every time a big summer blockbuster would come out, I would go see it, and regardless of whether it was The Avengers or Man of Steel, I would think, wow, that was really good, or oh, that was disappointing. And then based on those movies, I would then think, wow, I wonder what Godzilla's going to be like if that's what a modern action movie looks like. So it was always on my mind. But the other thing was that this movie was not just important to me personally, but it was kind of important to the entire fandom for a bunch of different reasons. Because prior to this point, we went through a drought in regards to Godzilla. Probably all the way up until 2011, when we got really the first new Godzilla thing in years with the IDW comics. And we, of course, had mixed feelings about their version of Godzilla. But anyway, the history of the Godzilla franchise was kind of riding on this, whether or not it was going to continue, or whether or not this would be it. If this movie was awesome, there'd be a bountiful future waiting for Godzilla. If it sucked and it bombed and everybody hated it, maybe not so much. So a lot of fans were putting a lot of pressure on this movie to be great, so that way we could go, alright, it's a new beginning, Godzilla's alive again, and now we're going to have a bunch of new movies to talk about and sink our teeth into. Which is something that we wanted. We wanted a live, fresh Godzilla franchise because we hadn't had one in so long. It had been 10 years since Godzilla Final Wars came out. And even years after the games and the comics had started, though the comics did continue, which was the only new Godzilla thing us Americans were getting for years. So there was a lot riding on this movie. And the other thing was that, aside from the future of seeing more Godzilla movies, a lot of Godzilla fans were looking at this movie to kind of give Godzilla a new sense of street cred, because the Godzilla fandom and Godzilla fans have kind of been mocked throughout the years for being Godzilla fans. The franchise was never taken seriously by anybody who had never sat down and watched one of the movies, and even if they did, they still might not take it seriously. So Godzilla fans felt a sense of frustration, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, at people not being able to get over certain things about the series and see what was truly great about it. And I think a lot of us were looking to this movie to recapture everything great about Godzilla, throw it up on an American movie screen, liven it up with all the fresh tapestries of a modern movie and all the modern sensibilities that go along with filmmaking, because I think that's a lot of the reason why a lot of people cannot get into Godzilla nowadays. They look at the movies, and regardless of whether or not them being old, they're just made with a different mindset and a different set of rules, and they're hard to get into from a modern film perspective. For us Godzilla fans, it's a little different since we grew up with them, so we're kind of used to all that wackiness and all the different production things. I know for me personally, knowing a lot of the production background, it's kind of easier for me to watch one of the movies and go, oh yeah, Rodan's fell into the water because when they were wearing the suit, the wire broke. So that's not a problem to me, that's just a fact of what the movie is. A lot of them, it's hard for me to look at critically for that very reason. They're so close to me, I know so much about them, I have so much history with them, that it's not the same to me as when I got into Doctor Who and would watch an episode from 2006 and go, yeah, I didn't really like this. But people who were watching Doctor Who as it aired when they were younger would go, oh, but that was like that because of this, and this. And it's like, I didn't grow up with it in that way, and I didn't know that when I was watching it, so it was kind of harder for me to get over those hurdles. I mean, I still became a Doctor Who fan, but I'm just using that as an example. So, my point is that Godzilla fans were looking to the 2014 movie for some kind of credibility in America. For people to watch that movie and go, I get it. I get why this is important. I get why this is cool. I get why you like this. So there was a lot riding on this movie for me personally, for the Godzilla fans at large, and even for the general public to a certain degree. I mean, you know, the months building up to the movie coming out and I go to a film school, so this might be a little different for me because I'm surrounded by geek culture 24/7. Everybody, even people who weren't Godzilla fans, saw those initial trailers and went, "Oh my god, this movie looks like the greatest thing ever." And it got me excited because I'm like, oh my god, people who didn't give a crap about Godzilla are giving a crap about a Godzilla movie. It was really exciting, and it was kind of a great time to be a Godzilla fan. So again, there was a lot riding on this movie for a lot of different people. And the other thing for me personally was that this was a really big movie for me, not just in terms of, oh, I made a lot of videos about it on YouTube. Oh, I met a lot of friends because of this movie. The history of the Sons of Serizawa is dependent upon the existence of this movie because I met David for the first time to do a video about this movie. I met Adam because of that video I did with David. I met Dylan and Andres because of the videos I did with Adam and David. It's all a snowball effect, all leading back to this movie. I owe this movie a lot of the stuff that I love in my life, which is really bizarre. And some people may be saying, oh, that's really sad, but you know what? It's the truth, and I am so grateful to it for that, regardless of this review that I'm about to do. And what I may say against it that may not be great, regardless of my problems with Godzilla 2014, I will always thank it for the things that it gave me. And the other thing was that it was a kind of an important movie for me as a film fan because it was the first time I had to wait a long time for a specific movie to come out and had a lot of time to really build up excitement. It increased the size of it in my life. If I had found out about it a year before it came out and then it would have come out, it probably wouldn't have been as a big of a deal. It probably would have been a big deal, but spending all those years thinking about it, all those years under its shadow, really went a long way for me to building it up in my mind as this big event. So, with all that said, then came the movie's release. And I treated it appropriately. I got a bunch of my friends together, I had a party at my house, I had a great time. And then we went to go see the movie. And it was this really cathartic experience because it was like the build-up and then the aftermath. So the moment in between, seeing the movie itself, sitting there, taking in what I was watching on the screen, the reality of the thing, was nearly impossible. Because all those years of build-up, that party, those videos, the SOS, everything, was being summed up in a 2-hour movie. And it made it nearly impossible to sit there and objectively go, oh yeah, that's a good thing that they did. Or, oh yeah, that's a crappy thing that they did. This is good. This is bad. Whatever. It was just what it was. And I wasn't really able to appreciate what the movie was actually doing. I was just kind of taking it in. Just kind of sitting there with my mouth open going, oh, that's what that is. Oh, that's what that picture meant that I saw 2 years ago. So it was a bizarre experience in that way. And I'm really glad that I've waited so long to do this review, intentional or unintentional as it may be, because I've really let that experience not dictate how good I actually think this movie is. Because when I saw the movie for the first time, and I've talked about this again before, so this shouldn't come as a shock to anybody who follows my channel, I had really, really mixed feelings about it. I thought it was okay, and that it wasn't at all what anybody expected it to be. And that was the really bizarre part about it, was that it was completely different than those trailers had made it out to be. And despite getting a lot of stuff, or including a lot of stuff rather, that fans had talked about wanting, it wasn't exactly what we wanted. And I think that's why a lot of people reacted really negatively to it the first time they saw it. But I was really careful not to do that when I walked out of that movie theater. Because thinking about it while I was walking around for the next day and a half, and then going to see it again with a completely different person, really helped me to go, alright, I didn't like how they handled Godzilla's origin the first time I saw it. And then I saw it again, and I was like, you know what? That kind of works. And that's why I also urge everybody to watch a movie multiple times and see it with different people, because you get to see it from different perspectives and you get to appreciate different aspects of it when you watch it. So I'm really glad that I did that, and then more than that, I saw the movie a bunch of other times in theaters when it was still in its original theatrical run, had a different experience every time I saw it, and then I've seen it like 5 or 6 times on my own, in my house, with my Blu-ray, one time not so legally before the movie was released on Blu-ray, and I got, again, completely different experience. Every time I watch this movie, prior to these past couple weeks, it was a completely different experience. One time I thought it was okay. One time I thought it was brilliant, one of the best movies ever made, one of my favorite movies of all time, one of the top 5 best Godzilla movies. Then I saw it again and I was like, what was I thinking? It's still just okay. Saw it again, then I'm like, ooh, maybe this movie's shifting more towards the bad. Oh, maybe it's shifting more towards the good. And then finally, I hit a point where every time I would watch it, and I'm making it sound like I've seen it a million times, I've seen it a little bit over a dozen, which is still a lot, mind you. Having seen it all those times, I've gotten to a point with it where the reality of the movie has finally sunk in. I've realized the things that it achieves, and then the things that it doesn't. The things that I like, and the things that I don't like have become consistent. Every time I watch the movie, I have the same feelings about certain aspects than I do about other aspects. So I think it has never been a better time than any to finally sit down and do my Godzilla Palooza addendum and analyze Godzilla 2014 within the context of this past series. Now here's the other thing about it. Godzilla Palooza, when I announced it and when I pitched it, was as a retrospective look at the franchise, having been years since any of the movies I was going to review was going to come out. Even the newest one with Final Wars, it had been, what, 8 years since Final Wars had come out? I was a kid when Final Wars came out. So it still had that retrospective look, despite how new one movie would be relative to another. So, and the other thing was that I was not only analyzing them as individual movies, or not even just as movies as part of a franchise, but I was also analyzing the character of Godzilla over time as new things were added, as changes to his characterization were made over time, the things that stuck, the things that didn't, and the things that became the most iconic about the series. But then also how the movies were affecting kind of the legacy of the character and the history of the character. They were as much historical analyses as they were critical film reviews, I feel. And when I was thinking about doing this video, I really thought long and hard about how I was going to approach it, which is why this intro has been so long. Because I was thinking, do I want it to be a in-depth spoiler analysis of the movie right after it came out? Or do I want it to be that equal retrospective review a while after it came out? So initially the plan was the Blu-ray would come out, I would grab it and do the review. So that was the plan. That seemed like the most logical thing to do. To let the movie have its impact and then review it in the context of Godzilla Palooza. The problem was I was doing another Palooza while the movie came out, Gamera Palooza, which you can now watch on my channel, which is done in the same style as Godzilla Palooza was, but obviously for Gamera. So obviously it wasn't going to happen immediately afterwards, so I knew it would be some time before I finally sat down and do it. But, again, I'm glad I waited as long as I did because I've let the movie get to a point of consistency that it wasn't before, and also given it plenty of time to impact the culture. Plenty of time to resonate with the world at what the movie is, and how exactly it has impacted Godzilla history, because it has. Regardless of people's feelings about it, regardless of how the movie objectively is, it has affected the franchise and the history. So now I think it's finally fitting to sit down and do the overly long critical analysis of Godzilla 2014. So, with all that rambling out of the way, let's begin. Well, it's a weird movie, because despite all the trailers and everything building up to it, showing it to be seemingly what everybody wanted, what I had been talking about in all the videos I did, you know, it looked like a dark, gritty take on Godzilla. It seemed to be going back to the horrific elements. The allegory seemed to be retained from the original Gojira. It was going back to the original Gojira. Everything seemed to be in place for the perfect American reboot of Godzilla. But I'm going to summarize my feelings on the movie with somebody else's words, so I apologize for these words not being of my own, but they're the best way and most intelligent way I've heard the movie summed up, so I'm going to use this person's word. J.D. Lees, the head of G-Fest and G-Fan magazine, G-Fest being the Godzilla fan convention over here in America that's held in Chicago every year. I went last year, had a great time. And at last year's convention, he summed up, and the movie was on everybody's mind, so this was inevitable. He summed up the movie in his own words as being good, but not it. Everybody was expecting this movie to be it, but it was good, but it wasn't it. Now, what does it mean exactly? Basically, it refers to this being the end-all, be-all, perfect summarizing of Godzilla, as I attempted to do at the end of Godzilla Palooza. Now, we can debate about how successfully I did that in that series, but that's what I attempted to do, and that's what I think everybody expected this movie to be like. The perfect sum-up of what's good about Godzilla. On a movie screen, it was going to be perfect. The greatest Godzilla movie ever made. Everything good about the series, all 29 movies, was going to be encapsulated on that movie screen. That there would never have to be another Godzilla movie after this, although we all wanted there to be more, because this would be the perfect sum-up. Everything would be done perfectly. It would focus on the humans enough. It would focus on the monsters enough. It would tell a great, solid Godzilla story. It would be fun, but it would be poignant. That was the it that J.D. Lees referred to that people wanted this movie to be. Now, how did it turn out? He said good, and I agree with him. Because I think how the best sum up Godzilla 2014 in my own words is that it's a mixed bag of good and not so good execution of really, really good ideas. Awesome ideas that seem befitting and excellent to do in a modern retelling of Godzilla. And the issue, by and large, is that some of the ideas are executed really well, and some of them are not executed so well. Very few of the ideas presented in the film, I think, can be called objectively poor ideas. But we'll get into that when we get into specifics, because I think all of the ideas on display here are great ideas that should have been attempted with a modern-day Godzilla reboot. And they attempted them. But the problem comes in where ultimately all films live and die, and that's how they're executed. You can rant and rave about how good an idea is on paper, but at the end of the day, it's how it emotionally resonates with the movie watcher. And sadly, a lot of the best ideas about Godzilla don't really hit their mark. Now, where the film excels in my eyes is as an entertaining, beautifully conceived from a directorial and script standpoint monster movie, with wonderful build-up, atmosphere, and a really intriguing story that builds well. Not to mention cutting CGI effects that make these fantastic, unreal creatures look completely photoreal. But sadly, where the film comes up short, and where I think it really needed to excel, is as a modern resurrection of Godzilla. Which is really, really, really frustrating, because that's what everybody wanted it to be. It was a fantastic reboot to that franchise. To see this character that everybody loved summed up and given his due on an American movie screen. And sadly, that's where the movie really, really struggles, and where the most amount of problems and frustrations come with it. It's not irreverent to the source material at all like 98 was. The complete opposite. The film is extremely reverential and respectful to not only the character, but the history of Godzilla and Godzilla fans. It's very careful to be that way, because 16 years of hatred on somebody else trying to re-envision Godzilla for Americans has not been treated that way. It's been treated with being one of the worst movies ever made, nobody liking it, and Roland Emmerich never being able to shake off that movie in terms of his relationship with critics and film viewers because of what he did to Godzilla. Legendary Gareth Edwards and everybody involved wanted to be damn sure that they couldn't be pegged with that. So the movie is very faithful to the source material. The problem is that it just doesn't give it the proper focus or impact. Godzilla isn't enough of the star of the show here, and it gets really frustrating because, again, it's super faithful to the source material in the scenes where it's focused upon, and Godzilla himself is spectacularly realized for the portions that are about him. Those moments are jaw-dropping levels of awesome. The best moments of the movie, some of the best moments in modern film history. And watching the movie, learning about the production, sitting here with it in my lap, the Blu-ray being right here, and me being able to think about it, you begin to realize that there's a really spectacular Godzilla story here that could potentially be the perfect modern version of the story. Almost as good as I think Godzilla 84 is, though there's some debate on how great that movie is, of course. But in regards to bringing Godzilla back, keeping him faithful to his roots, and telling a story that befits a modern setting, it really comes up lacking because of how much it's shoved into the background. Now, in addition to that, you throw in some pacing issues, a mixed range of character development, and a bit of prominence put on film theory, rather than just taking things to natural places, and there you've got a Godzilla movie with a lot of flaws, but one that still has a lot to offer. I don't want to make it sound like I'm crapping on this movie saying that it's bad. Again, to the contrary, I think it's a really, really good monster movie, really entertaining. And it's one of those movies that while you're watching it, most of the problems that you have with it are really put into, just like Godzilla in the movie, put into the background, because what's on screen when he is not focused upon isn't bad, it's just not what you're there to see. And therefore, it's less interesting than that. But let's get into all the specifics. That's a lot of really general overview stuff, but it's time to get into the nitty-gritty. Dig as deep in as I did with the original Godzilla, Godzilla 84, Final Wars, all the classic Godzilla movies. It's time to give the modern one the same treatment. Let's get into specifics by doing a plot synopsis.